I want to congratulate the USC U.S. China Institute. You are, I think, by far the most active and most visible and most innovative U.S. China program in the country. So here it is. In terms of public opinion and perceptions, there's a curiously emotional nature to this relationship and to these images and perceptions, and it's often been described as a love-hate relationship. We have alternated between the image of the friendly, cuddly panda bear and the fierce dragon. And much of this has been rooted, as has been mentioned before, in missionary history, which fostered the idea that Americans somehow knew better, knew what to do for China. Hollywood fantasies about China and the mystery of China, and racism, which was directed towards immigrants from China. And more than anything, I think Americans have for a long time tried to change China in one way or another. Excuse me. But now, as we see from these public opinion surveys, the power relationship is shifting, and shifting dramatically. Attitudes on both sides have oscillated between positive and negative in the past, and the two opinion polls from Horizon and Pew are very valuable in suggesting that we are beginning, I think, to find more realism and more common sense. These are like going to the doctor. They're diagnostic instruments where you can go and kind of measure your blood pressure, if you will. And if necessary, the doctor can give us blood pressure medicine and help us to avoid a heart attack. And so I think public opinion surveys are also very useful in measuring the blood pressure, measuring the temperature. Diplomatic relations have been normalized, but have mutual perceptions been normalized? And so I think neither survey suggests that either country, either side is going to have a heart attack, but rather that it's this very complex intertwining of cooperation and competition. We are neither friend nor enemy, as has been said before. With Zhang Hui's Horizons survey, we see considerable ambivalence, a great deal of admiration, more than you might have expected, for the United States as a source of technology and education, but at the same time, resentment of the United States for its interference in issues like Taiwan. The U.S. is viewed as more aggressive by these Chinese youth than Japan. And I think that's striking, even though Japan is lower on other questions. The surveys also, I think, are a reflection of self-image. For example, the United States is seen as a model of legal reform and Social Security reform. And this, I think, has got to say something about China's own domestic priorities. There are some surprises in the Horizon survey. The popularity of Russia and the finding that Russia is most important to China's security. Is this a long-term trend? Is Putin the tough man with the tender heart? Is he the reason for this? Is this some kind of commentary on China's own leadership? And then there are questions that are not asked in the survey, but that I think Zhang Hui mentioned she would like to ask in the future. China is confident about its own economy, but what about the problems that have been mentioned earlier today? And so we look forward to more answers and more insights to those. I have one concern about the Horizon survey. I don't think there's always enough distinction that's been made between views of the American government, American culture, American society, and American people. These are mixed in some of the questions, but those are very different categories, as we all know. And finally, Zhang Hui mentioned some comparisons between major cities in China and then the third and fourth tier cities for Chinese youth. The third and fourth tier students have less contact, but it would be interesting to have more information about those contrasts. On the Pew survey, here again, as Richard Wyke has mentioned, we see major changes and rapid change in the perceptions of power, driven largely by economics. Global attitudes toward China must, I think, be linked largely to trade. But I wonder about the categories of trade. Excuse me. How much difference would we see in Africa, for example, where China has been focused more on the extraction of resources and where there's been considerable controversy about China's policies in Africa. There's similar contrasts between the Pew surveys and the Horizon survey on ambivalence, about American attitudes. But again, the headline here is China's economic rise and U.S. relative decline. It's striking to see that 52% of Americans have an unfavorable view of China, mainly, I think, because China, as Richard has said, is because China is viewed as an economic threat, which now includes cybersecurity. But again, as he mentioned, much less concern about Iran. I think we all know the U.S. Congress is probably much lower ranking. In fact, it was said that the U.S. Congress was less popular than North Korea and some other categories that we probably don't want to talk about in public. The lack of trust has been discussed a great deal all day long. And here again, it's striking to see that the American general public treats Russia at 33%, a bit more, has a bit more trust in Russia than it does in China with 66%. I'm struck by the differences which Richard mentioned between elite and public opinion. It's especially provocative, and I think this really bears more study and more explanation. A lot, again, is explained by economics, the concern with loss of jobs, debt, the trade deficit. But some of these disparities are rather striking. Again, I'm underlining things that Richard already said, but the general public is saying 55% build a strong relationship with China, but a much higher percentage, between 81 and 94% of the elite is saying build a strong relationship. So much more skepticism among the general public. Quite a disparity between the general public and scholars, which surprises me, on human rights issues, whether that should be a priority for U.S. Relations with China. Much less concern against, as Richard Wyke has already mentioned, about jobs and debt. Support for arms sales to Taiwan is low for both general public and elites, and this is not new, but it raises the question of whether this does forebode some sort of change in U.S. policy. But the question I have for Richard is whether the public is ahead or behind on these issues. And are their opinions more stable? Are they better? Are they less informed? Presumably they're less informed. But even more to the point, I guess, is are American experts, including scholars and journalists, doing an adequate job of informing the public, and how can we do better? Finally, on the issue of soft power and global attitudes, I think that by far the greatest source of soft power and perceptions for China today resides in the 200,000 Chinese students who are now here in the United States, and much smaller numbers in China. I think it would be extremely important for more sort of systematic research to be done about their attitudes and opinions of the United States and vice versa, Americans going to China, both before and after. How does this experience change their thinking, right? And I don't think we know enough about this, but I think we do know that many of these young people are going to be leaders, and so it's not a question of an immediate impact. It's not a question of just a few years, 2 or 3 years from now, but a decade or more down the road, I think they could be extremely influential, extremely important. And we may well come to the point where the next leader of China has had experience of training in the U.S., and maybe the next American president somewhere down the line will have studied in China. So I think we are moving beyond the superficial positive-negative dichotomy of the past. There's more ambiguity, more ambivalence, and more complexity, and that's a good thing.
Thank you very